Thank you so much, Michael Reynolds, for joining me.
You're very welcome.
It means a great deal. Michael is the editor-in-chief of Europa Editions, which was the first place I ever worked in publishing. The place that gave me my chance, my entryway, which is...
It's a family reunion.
It is a family reunion, exactly.
Yeah.
And Michael, you've been tremendously successful at Europa, and I think you've been there for 15 years now?
I've been there for 15 years, yeah. I actually started working with the Italian company that is the parent company of Europa Editions, and had been working for them for a few months when Europa was founded, or the idea of Europa started circulating, and I was moved immediately over to Europa.
Someone asked you a while ago what your route into publishing was, and your answer was, I have to quote...
Circuitous, I
yes,
think is
yes,
the right...
I have to quote some of it.
Okay.
Said, I was the groundskeeper at the biggest outdoor maze in the Southern Hemisphere, a gold miner, a milkman, a barman, a waiter, a musician, a crooner, a windsurfing instructor, a bookseller, a poetry teacher, a call center operator, the personal assistant to a disabled person, a security guard, gardener, construction worker, day laborer. You painted houses, you sold package holidays.
Yeah.
And so on. And when I was reading this initially, I thought you meant that your route into publishing came through all these books that you had read. So you had inhabited these roles, but no.
Not at all. They were actual jobs that I worked for a while. None of them felt like careers, but they were all jobs and all necessary. And I think in a certain sense that they also helped me in my work as an independent publisher. They certainly don't reflect any sort of traditional path into publishing, but I think one of the things that makes independent publishers different from corporate imprints is this great variety of people who are working there, and variety of experiences, and the ability to interact with different players in the publishing panorama, in the publishing scene, and I think some of that ability, some of the ability to dialogue with different figures in the industry comes from having a variety of experiences and a breadth of experiences. So in that sense, I think that all those experiences have been helpful.
And I think that applies to authors as well, because we hear from a lot of authors who, don't have literary careers. And so they think, who am I to write a book? I paint houses or I sell vacation packages. And, there's this sense that they're not worthy of. So could you maybe touch on that, how people may not have the professional experience, but may still have the literary sensibilities that...
Well, I think that we have, certainly for me, the greatest training, the greatest help that you can get as a writer is to be a great reader, and anyone can be a good reader or an assiduous reader. So I think that aspect, whether or not you've had a quote-unquote literary career, or whether you've been trained as a writer, if you're a sensitive reader and a careful reader and an assiduous reader, I think that can prepare you quite well for writing your story. And many people have very compelling stories to tell, so there's no reason, I think, why those people can't be successful as writers as well.
Could you tell us a little bit about Europa's mandate, your list, the kind of books you look for?
So we started 15 years ago as a publisher of international fiction, and that meant it was very important for us that the connotation of that word international meant, of course, works in translation, but also works by English language authors, whether they be American or English or Australian, Canadian, whatever. We were looking for the best work from all over the world, whether it be in English or another language. And that in a certain sense, I think made us different from other publishers who were doing works in translation, who were operative at the time. There were, a number of very good, very fine publishers that did works in translation, but most of them were doing only work in translation, or they were doing a particular kind of literature in translation that was maybe for more of a niche audience. Europa came into the market thinking that our mandate was not simply to connect a writer with a given readership in this country, but also to connect readerships. Yeah, so we were taking books very often that were hugely successful in their native market, and they had an existing readership. And by publishing those books in the American market, what we were hoping, as I said, was to not only connect a writer with a readership, but to connect readerships. And in that sense, with books, to create a bridge, to create some channel of communication between people in a given country and readers in this country. And that felt, at the time that we were founded, at the time that we published our first books, that felt particularly important because it was not long after 9/11 happened in this country, and I think that in addition to sort of the shock and dismay that came as a result of that event, of that violence, that attack, there was also a sort of concern that one of the consequences of that event was a kind of communication breakdown internationally, that we were having difficulty communicating with even countries that were considered our allies. Yeah, there were disagreements and things were calcifying, and it was becoming difficult for us to communicate. So Europa really grew out of that moment from a desire to, in some way, to facilitate more communication between countries and cultures, and that not only informed the origin of the books that we published and the approach to publishing them, but also the kinds of books that we were publishing. So they do tend to be. I'm not convinced of this sort of this spectrum of literary commercial, but let's use that for convenience sake. Yeah. The books we publish don't tend to be very densely experimental or literary, and they don't tend to be very extremely commercial. They're somewhere in the middle. They are targeted towards a general readership, let's say, not necessarily a readership who would read a book in translation just because it's in translation, but a readership that would read a book in translation, or a debut novel, or a work of short stories, for example, because it's good, because it entertains them, because it's informative and elucidating and entertaining.
And is that also true when you publish a debut author in the States? Do you then publish their work in translation in Italy, or?
Not always, but we have a very, very close and daily working relationship with the parent company in Italy. So if it makes sense that a book that we acquire for this market, for the US, has potential, if it seems that it has potential in Italy, then I'll send it to one of my colleagues and put in a good word for that author and that book, and hopefully they'll agree with me, and in that case we would acquire it for Italy as well. And it tends to work quite well. The occasions when we have acquired a book for the UK and for the US and Canada and for Italy, then we can work together on a coordinated launch and publicity and marketing campaign.
Yeah, I imagine that's helpful. The synergy there is, everyone knows about the big publishers, but they don't understand that there's this world of independent publishers. Could you speak to the strengths of working with an independent publisher? Why, I guess, which author might benefit more from working with.
Well, yes, I can. I mean, I think that in very broad terms that independent publishing is safeguarding bibliodiversity in this market. I mean, any ecosystem needs diversity to thrive. And that is true of the culture of reading in this country and the industry, the book industry and the publishing industry. We need diversity in that industry. We need diversity in our culture of reading. And it's mostly the independent publishers that are willing to take those chances and those risks, to run those risks with authors that don't necessarily present themselves as having a super strong platform or an existing audience that they can, that the corporate imprints can publish to. And I think we see increasingly in the industry things running towards books by authors that have an existing platform, books as an appendage, to something else. We don't publish books that are appendages. For us, the book is the main thing, and the author is the main thing. And what that means, I think in sort of real terms, at a smaller independent house, is that you have the entire house behind that project. We're not in a position where we have to publish gads of books in order to fill a budget gap or anything like that. We publish the number of books that we need to publish and that we want to publish, and that we feel, are sort of the right number for us to allow us to devote resources to each of those books. The strengths, I think, of the independent publisher are that, the ability to devote resources and energy to each single project, but also the way that we approach publishing and approach the publication of that book. I think we're very sort of boots on the ground. We want to work with our retail partners. We have good relationships with the reviewing community. We are working every possible channel for the marketing and publication of a given title. And we do that as a group, not as a department within a large corporation. So that means that you have sort of an editorial sensibility that is bleeding into the marketing and the publicity and the sales. Very often I feel that the author and agent and editor may see certain strengths in a book that are not seen in the same way by the marketing and sales department at a larger house. That's not going to happen at an independent house. You're going to see marketing and sales people talking about a book in the same way that an editor would talk about it, or with sharing the same vision, let's say. What else? I mean, I think the kinds of authors, again, it goes back, I think, to the qualities of the book and a single project. We're much more likely, I think, as an independent publisher to invest in a book because we love it and because we see potential in it and we see a readership for it. And all of the other considerations and author platform and existing audience, marketing possibilities are secondary. I'm not saying that they're not considerations, because we're a for-profit publisher. We have to sell our books, and thinking about whether or not a book will sell is realistic. We have to be realistic about things. But we never, fortunately, are in a position where we say, I hate this book, but it's going to sell really well. And we don't have to think about that. We don't have to publish that kind of book. We can leave that for other kinds of publishers.
Right. That's so, I know it sounds like it's so obvious, but it really doesn't happen in the industry where the book itself is the priority, where it's really about the work and not we have so many authors who are concerned about platform because it's almost eclipsed the book.
It seems increasingly that, I was looking around even, it's going also beyond this market as well. I was looking at the bestseller list in Italy at the moment, and the top 3 of the top 5 titles selling at the moment are by YouTube stars, right? Yeah. And one of them has been on the bestseller list for 10 weeks or 12 weeks, so it's not really a momentary thing. And that's fine. I think books that are selling keep the industry moving along. Yeah, that's a good thing. Anything that's selling, any book that's selling is a good thing. Yeah. But is it the kind of book that we're interested in? Is it the kind of author that we're interested in? Probably not. And I think without the kinds of books that we are publishing, that we are interested in, the industry would drift too far in that direction towards authors who are publishing books because it's as a secondary thing, as an appendage to their main activity.
Right. Mm-hmm. And when it comes to, this might be in flux, but at the moment, what kind of submissions are you looking for? From agents, obviously, but...
So right now, can I use my props?
Yes, yeah. Absolutely.
So one of the fun things that we've done this year...
Sorry to interrupt. I was telling Michael I own this one.
So we started earlier this year an imprint of nonfiction, sort of slim. They're fairly short books, books of ideas, pop philosophy, pop history. We have a wonderful book on Greek grammar that just came out, literary travel. All sorts of things, and we're hoping to do about 8 to 10 of these a year. Right now, we've acquired, I think, about 12 titles for this new series, and I haven't acquired a single one in English. So I'm very actively working with agents to find the right kinds of submissions for us for this series in English, from American writers. So that's one thing that I'm very keen on at the moment, and I think certainly we're not interested. We're not a matter of less, but we're not interested really in publishing manuals or self-help or parenting or any of that sort of things. These really have to be works of narrative nonfiction. What we're hearing from retailers is that the reason these books are working in their space is that they're able quite easily to move loyal Europa readers from our fiction to this narrative nonfiction because it is storytelling, but it's storytelling about ideas, let's say. In addition to that, we're also doing some nonfiction outside of this series, including the new Elena Ferrante book.
Very exciting.
Yes, indeed. This is coming out very soon now in November of this year as a gift edition. As you can see here, it's all illustrated and beautifully done. Yeah. So we're doing other kinds of nonfiction that is either larger in scope or larger in page count, or that seems to have a different kind of direction than the works we're publishing in Compass. We're also doing nonfiction outside of this series as hardcovers. The core of the list, I would say, is still literary fiction. That's still the heart of what we publish. Again, the kinds of things that we're looking for, it's always a very difficult question, but we certainly are interested in very strong stories and strong place, strong voice, and strong characters. It's important for us that, place is very important for us. I think that sort of is part of the DNA of the publishing house, given that we publish so much work from abroad that conveys a very strong sense of place. When we're looking at submissions from American writers, often what we're looking for with our American writers are stories with a strong sense of place in this country, whether it be historical fiction or contemporary fiction. That's I think less of a hard and fast rule. But we want that strong sense of place here as well. We've had a run of literary fiction acquisitions lately, so personally I'm more interested in contemporary settings at the moment, and let's say contemporary stories. I think that for me as a reader and also as an editor, a lot of what I'm seeing from female writers and what I'm reading by female writers at the moment seems to be more compelling. I think that the problems, maybe also the sense of uncharted terrain on the part of many female novelists, it gives the work that they're doing a great sense of urgency and presence and timeliness. So I'm very keen to sort of to explore that direction more.
I was so happy to find out that New York book editor author Abbigail Rosewood was acquired by Europa, and that fits some of the criteria.
I think it does. Yeah, I think it does. There's certainly the relationship between mother and daughter. We've had some success publishing books.
Yes, just a little bit of success with that.
With that particular relationship at the center of the story. So that appealed to us. I think also the juxtaposition of settings. I think she, the early scenes in that book, and then the returning to those scenes are set in Vietnam are very strong, and they were very compelling, and had an excellent sense of place. But also the scenes in New York and in America also had that, and so the two settings, I think, played off one another extremely well, and her writing is superb. Yeah, she's really a terrific writer.
Yeah, it's amazing that it's her debut novel.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd like to just touch on your relationship with booksellers as well. You mentioned that. But I feel like Europa has such a strong on-the-ground presence. And I was asking you, I see Europa on the tables all the time, and most publishers pay for that placement. But Europa just gets the love from the bookseller.
Often that is the case. When we first came into this market, I think my approach was very informed by what I had seen at the Italian house, and they, for other reasons, I think for reasons connected to their relationship with the media and in Italy, and the fact that they had set up their publisher in Rome as opposed to Milan, which was where most of the media was based. They had always pursued very strong relationships with retailers, and because that's where I cut my teeth as a publisher, that was normal. When I started at Europa and in New York and elsewhere in the country, and I would walk into stores and introduce myself and ask the booksellers things about our books and other books. I very quickly learned that was not what other publishers did, that was an unusual thing to be doing. And I was surprised by that. I didn't expect that. But as I said, that's how I'd learned to be a publisher, and it also makes perfect sense for me, because I think the booksellers are essentially the ones who are putting the book in the hands of readers. I want them to have some sort of sense of why we're doing what we're doing and how we're doing it, and I want them to know about our books. I want them to develop, booksellers can't read everything, so if they are able to develop and to nurture a sort of sense of trust in what we're doing as a publishing house, then they have no qualms recommending books that they may not have read. They're good at talking about, they're good at recommending them, but they may not have read them. It's impossible for them to do that. And that's the kind of relationship that we want. And I think, we've been clever or lucky or a combination of both. We also publish well into their space, into the bookseller space, because we give them books that are somewhat different, that are different from maybe what Barnes & Noble has on their front tables, or different from what Amazon is pushing out there. That allows them in some ways to sort of distinguish their stores, to make those stores more curatorial, but they're not too different that they don't sell, or that they're going to make their customers, they're going to feel comfortable recommending our books to a wide variety of customers. So this is sort of a perfect product for them, and as a result, I think of nurturing that relationship, and I think mostly because of the books that we're publishing and the way that we're publishing them, we have a good working relationship with the booksellers, and I think particularly the independent booksellers. They've been always our first and our best friends in the business.
Do you have, for an author who would also like to, and it's more challenging for an author, but who would like to talk to the booksellers in their city and introduce them to their work, do you have some advice about how to speak about a book? It's so difficult.
How to speak about a book?
Yeah.
I think, we make fun, I think, of the elevator pitch.
Yes.
But
mercilessly.
And comp titles, I think philosophically we're against the whole idea of comp titles, and certainly my colleagues in Italy, they can't get their heads around this idea of comp titles. But you have to consider that the bookseller has even less time than I have to recommend a book to a customer, and they need to be able to say one thing and say it compellingly, and that may be, what have you read? If you've read that, then you're going to love this. Or it may be, this book is about a mother-daughter relationship where the mother is essentially imprisoned and nurturing a relationship with her daughter. There needs to be something that you can say that's quick and easy about a book. I think importantly, authors need to show that they're in some way prioritizing the local bookstore. If they plan to go into that local bookstore and have a conversation with a bookseller, that bookseller can't go to their computer once that conversation is finished and go on the author website and find Amazon as the first link. Right. It's not going to go down well, let's say. Yeah. So that is important to consider if you're going to have those conversations as an author. If you're going to make an effort to nurture relationships in the independent channel, then that has to be reflected in what you're doing elsewhere as well. That's
great advice. So make sure that on your website you have the links to the local.
Yeah. And I don't think anybody really expects authors or publishers not to link to Amazon, because that would be doing themselves or their authors a disservice. But there are ways of prioritizing and ways of talking about, whether it be on social media or on your website or simply in conversations or at events, where you can show your goodwill towards bricks and mortar stores.
And that's so true. You show your support. It's not like Amazon cares what you say, but the booksellers do. They really they take notice.
And it can make a difference. Yeah, a local author, especially with a book that is of regional interest,
Yes.
you know, that can sell well at a bookstore. And, you know, 50, 60, 100, 150 copies sold can make a significant impact on a bookstore's bottom line, whereas it makes no impact on Amazon's bottom line.
Right, right.
So.
No, that's terrific advice. Is there anything else that any last words to?
Oh, gosh.
Don't
put it like that.
Sorry.
Like after this, you're going to take me in there.
You know, so that this video goes viral. That's the only way to do it, Michael.
Gosh. No, I'm afraid I have no platform. What to say? I mean, authors keep writing your books and keep having them edited professionally, because that is important. I think the you know, the role of the editor, the role of the publisher. I'm a quote unquote legacy publisher, so I would say this, but I still think that we have a role to play, especially for the kinds of authors who don't have an existing platform or do not feel that they want to spend 90% of their time marketing their book. If they prefer to write, then a traditional, quote-unquote, traditional publisher serves them better than, you know, self-publishing or whatever it may be. And of course, books and authors still need good editing. So those are my final words, I'm afraid.
That's great. And that's really great advice too, because so many authors are really concerned about the marketing part. They feel as if they need to, whether they publish traditionally or not, the bulk of the marketing falls on their shoulders, which in some sense is true. They still need to.
I think a healthy collaboration is the best way to approach this.
Right.
There certainly, you know, there's a lot that an author can do for a book.
And only they can do.
And only they can do. But I also think they need to want to do that, because feeling that you're pressured into doing that or you're obligated, I think, is not especially productive for authors. I think it's far more important for an author like that to concentrate on authoring stuff.
Yeah, and Europa is particularly good at allowing authors who aren't inclined to spend time on the marketing to focus on the writing and leave it at that.
I think, well, you know, I think because we do so many foreign authors who can't or don't want to come here or don't speak English or whatever it may be, they're not heavily involved in the marketing and publicity. And so far, we've never found that to be an obstacle to success.
That's tremendous. I mean, that's a huge point, you know. Well, thank you so much, Michael.
You're very
really
welcome.
appreciate your time, and it's so great to see you.
Good to see you.
Thanks.
I better stop gossiping now that we're recording.
Oh, we recorded all the best.